The man's body is hanging 100 meters in the air, right across from the entrance to the Gangnam police station. The head of the major crimes unit Choi Chang-sik rushes to the scene after receiving the report. But the moment he sees the dead man's face, his pupils suddenly shrink. How could he not recognize this man? This was the very man he had killed himself. Choi Chang-sik was a big name at the Gangnam police station. In his 20 years on the job, he had solved countless major cases. Just 2 days ago, he had received the highest honor a police officer could get, the presidential award. The station chief had even personally called him in for a talk. He repeatedly warned Choi that as long as nothing went wrong lately, his promotion at the end of the month was practically guaranteed. At the celebration dinner, his subordinates even chipped in to buy Choi a small gift, an expensive tie clip. The gift was not particularly valuable, but it was full of thought, and Choi absolutely loved it. As his subordinates took turns raising their glasses to him, he completely let loose and drank himself completely drunk. The celebration ended late that night. Already feeling the effects of the alcohol, Choi was surrounded by his colleagues as they put him into a taxi. He was still caught up in the joy of his promotion and the praise from his subordinates, completely unaware that danger was quietly closing in. After getting into the taxi, Choi was still a little groggy from the alcohol, but his instincts as a veteran cop told him something was wrong. The driver was not taking him home. Instead, he was heading straight for the outskirts. Only then did he become more alert and ask the driver,
아저씨 여기 어디니까 목동 가자고 그럽니다. 아저씨 목동 7단지 가자고.
But the driver completely ignored him and simply gave him a sinister look before continuing toward the outskirts. Soon the car arrived at the foot of a deserted mountain. It was pitch black with not a single streetlight around. To his surprise, the driver got out, grabbed a knife and charged straight at him. Even after Choi revealed that he was a police officer, the man did not back down. With no other choice, Choi had to fight back. The driver had completely dropped the act. He gripped the knife tightly and glared at Choi with a vicious look.
왜 옛날 일은 다시 들춰내서 사람을 곤란하게 만들고 지랄이.
Choi's expression changed when he heard what the driver said, but he had no time to think about it. The driver was already charging at him with the knife, and the two men immediately wrestled with each other. In the chaos, Choi accidentally drove the knife into the driver's body. The man coughed up blood, struggled for a few moments and stopped breathing. Choi stared at the body in front of him with his mind completely blank. He tremblingly pulled out his phone and was about to call the police, when the station chief suddenly called him.
박준철 치안감님 알지? 본청 인사국장.
예, 압니다.
국장님한테 네 진급 로비하고 있다. 좋냐?
예.
내가 오늘 국장님한테 확실히 푸시했으니까 괜한 사고 치지 말고 차분히 기다리면 돼. 앞으로 최창식이 세상 많이 달라질 거다.
That phone call was what gave him a crazy idea, and completely changed the course of the rest of his life. Sometimes evil does not begin with some grand act of wickedness, but with a single moment of wishful thinking. He forced himself to calm down, and found a roll of tape inside the car, carefully covering any spots that might have his fingerprints on them. Then he wiped away as many traces as possible. Finally, he dumped the body into some weeds on the outskirts and fled the scene. But what he never expected was that his crime would be completely exposed before the night was even over. Early the next morning, the driver's body was lifted by a crane and hung directly across from his police station, becoming headline news across Seoul. What devastated him even more was that he had to personally take charge of the case. Having to investigate his own crime made him feel even more tormented. He forced himself to stay calm and ordered his men to examine the body. But every time he looked at the body, his fear grew. He was terrified that his men might discover the traces he had accidentally left behind. But sure enough, the very thing he feared happened. While they were examining the scene, Detective Ma, the deputy team leader, noticed a taxi suspiciously parked beside the construction site. So he sent rookie detective Cha Dong-jae over to check it out. While searching the car, Cha Dong-jae accidentally found a metal tie clip underneath the rear floor mat. He immediately recognized it as the exact tie clip he and his co-workers had given Choi Chang-sik the night before. His expression instantly became complicated, but when Detective Ma came over to ask him about it, he kept quiet. Instead, he quietly slipped the tie clip into his pocket. The trunk of the taxi was also covered in blood. Clearly, the killer had used this taxi to transport the body from the outskirts to this location. Although Detective Ma, the deputy team leader, looked big and intimidating, he was actually extremely observant. Seeing that Choi Chang-sik seemed out of sorts, he assumed he had simply drunk too much the night before. So he took over and began assigning the investigation tasks himself. Soon the forensic team came back with some good news. But to Choi Chang-sik, this was anything but good news. What terrified him even more was that Detective Ma had reconstructed the taxi's route using surveillance footage. The footage showed the driver picking up a male passenger before heading straight toward the outskirts. That male passenger was very likely the killer. Although none of the cameras along the way had captured his face, they could identify him as long as they found where the passenger had gotten into the taxi. Choi Chang-sik completely panicked watching Detective Ma piece everything together. If he let him continue the investigation, it would only be a matter of time before he was exposed. So so he went alone to the intersection where he had gotten into the taxi the night before. Sure enough, there was a surveillance camera at the intersection. It was camera number 178, and it had probably captured him getting into the taxi. He immediately rushed back to the station. His colleagues were diligently checking through the storage discs they had collected. Choi Chang-sik casually walked over and found the disc from camera 178. Luckily, no one had checked this disc yet. He waited until his colleague wasn't looking and slipped the disc into his pocket. But just as he was about to leave, he locked eyes with Cha Dong-jae, who was about to report a major discovery. Cha Dong-jae had seen everything but still chose not to say anything. Instead, he calmly revealed what he had discovered.
우면산에서 공사장으로 가는 길목에 주택가에 있는 CCTV 내용인데요. 범인 모습이 확실합니다.
그 택시 맞아?
네, 맞습니다. 5387.
트렁크는 사람 맞지?
자, 주소 좀 확인하고 빨리 출동해.
네, 알겠습니다.
Choi Chang-sik immediately led a team to arrest the man seen in the footage. As soon as they reached the area near the suspect's home, they ran into him while he was out buying something. The moment he saw the police, he knew the truth had been exposed and took off running. He clearly knew the area better and darted through the maze of narrow alleys. Soon everyone lost track of him. Choi Chang-sik immediately ordered everyone to split up and search, but he deliberately slowed down and circled around to the other end of the alley. Getting there first, he cornered the suspect in a dead end. With nowhere left to run, the suspect cried and insisted he was innocent.
나만 죽였다고. 그놈이 가르쳐준 곳에 가니까 이미 죽어 있었다고. 난 그놈이 시키는 대로 했다고. 나 진짜 거기 가서 싫어하다가 배나 껍질이라고.
Choi Chang-sik stared at him with cold eyes. He had clearly made up his mind to kill him. Of course he knew the man was telling the truth. Just then Detective Ma's voice came through the radio asking for an update. That only made him more determined to go through with it. The others would arrive any second. Once they got there, he would have no chance to make a move. So without hesitation he pulled the trigger. But as he turned to leave, he saw Cha Dong-jae standing at the entrance of the alley staring at him with a complicated look. Choi Chang-sik froze. He had no idea when the other man had arrived, or whether he had heard what the suspect said. Meanwhile, the other officers also heard the gunshot and rushed to the scene. Back at the station, Choi Chang-sik claimed that the suspect had resisted arrest, so he had no choice but to shoot him in self-defense. Because of the reputation Choi Chang-sik had built over the years, no one questioned him and they believed his story. The forensic report also came back. The dead driver, surnamed Young, and Lee Young-hoon, who was shot by Choi Chang-sik, had both recently taken a powerful illegal substance, and it was extremely rare on the streets. Based on this, Detective Ma suspected that the two men had killed each other over the illegal substance. The chief was already under enormous pressure because of the body that had been hung up, so he was very pleased with Detective Ma's theory. He immediately declared that the case could be closed, and even held a press conference, announcing that the man shot dead by Choi Chang-sik was very likely the killer. As long as the DNA test came back, they would be able to give the public a satisfying explanation. The case seemed like it was about to be solved. Everyone was thrilled, and they prepared to go out for a meal, but Choi Chang-sik couldn't feel happy at all. He turned down Detective Ma's invitation, and stayed in his office obsessively cleaning up his desk. He knew that once the DNA results came back, an even bigger storm would hit the police station, because the skin tissue found underneath Young's fingernails belonged to him. He couldn't just sit around and wait for it to happen. Then he remembered that both men had recently taken that unusual illegal substance. There was no way low-level thugs like them could have gotten their hands on something that rare so easily. He suspected the person supplying them might be the mastermind who had been tormenting him. He tracked down a gang leader he had once protected, and attacked him without saying a word, forcing a clue out of him. The gang leader told Choi Chang-sik that the last buyer of the rare illegal substance was a struggling actor named Kim Yoon-kyu. He had been arrested for drug use and ended up with a criminal record. Then after fans exposed his scandals, he completely disappeared from the entertainment industry. No one knew where he had gone. Of course, Choi Chang-sik wasn't going to give up just because the man had disappeared. If anything, that made him even more suspicious. He tracked down Kim Yoon-kyu's former manager, but he didn't know where Kim Yoon-kyu was either. Ever since the scandal broke, he had cut off contact with everyone. Just when Choi Chang-sik was at a dead end, the DNA results finally came back. As expected, they had absolutely nothing to do with Lee Young-hoon. The results sent the chief into a rage, and he harshly berated Choi Chang-sik, blaming him for mishandling the case. But what Choi Chang-sik never expected was, after chewing him out, the chief actually said,
오늘 이 검사 결과 없었던 거다. 실무진들끼리 잘 협조해서 DNA 검사 결과 다시 맞죠. 그리고 사건 종결해.
That finally allowed Choi Chang-sik to breathe a sigh of relief. He never expected the chief's selfish motives to accidentally help him. But before Choi Chang-sik could fully relax, Cha Dong-jae showed up with the tie clip and the surveillance disc. Every word he said was clearly hinting that Choi Chang-sik should turn himself in and admit what he had done. Choi Chang-sik stared at the tie clip with a pale face, unable to say a word. He knew he had been exposed. The next morning, after struggling with his conscience all night, Choi Chang-sik was ready to turn himself in. But suddenly he received a call from Kim Dong-kyu's manager.
어제 제가 사방에 전화를 하다가 우연찮게 들었는데 말입니다. 그 친구가 요즘 그 상암동 어디서 그 모조라는 멤버십 바를 한다던데요.
but when Choi Chang-sik rushed to the bar it was completely empty. There was only a calendar on the table with 3 addresses marked on it. He immediately called Detective Ma and asked him to look into the addresses, but what Detective Ma told him sent a chill through his entire body. It turned out that all 3 addresses were connected to murder cases, and all the victims were former colleagues who had worked with him 15 years ago. Memories suddenly came flooding back. 15 years ago he was just an ordinary rookie cop. Along with those colleagues who were now dead, he had been assigned to investigate a poisoning at a private casino under the command of the police chief at the time. All 12 people involved in that case died from cyanide poisoning. Under intense public pressure, the police chief quickly closed the case. They pinned the blame on an intellectually disabled janitor named Old Kim who worked odd jobs at the casino. To make the evidence look convincing, the chief at the time, Choi Do-hyun, bribed 2 eyewitnesses and had them testify against Old Kim. And those 2 eyewitnesses were none other than Mr. Young, who was later killed by Choi Chang-sik, and Lee Young-hoon, whom he framed. Old Kim was soon sentenced to death. Choi Chang-sik and several other officers were promoted and rewarded for solving the case. Chief Choi Do-hyun also climbed the ranks step by step until he reached his current position. Choi Chang-sik finally pieced everything together. This was all an act of revenge that had been 15 years in the making, and the mastermind behind it all was almost certainly Kim Young-kyu, the son of Old Kim from 15 years ago.
제가 얼마 전에 사람을 죽여서 요 앞 공사장 크레인에다가 매달았거든요. 에? 나라.
Kim Young-kyu turned himself in at the police station, but he insisted on speaking with Choi Chang-sik alone. In the interrogation room, Kim Young-kyu sat in a chair and stared coldly at Choi Chang-sik. He threatened Choi Chang-sik and demanded that he kill the mastermind from 15 years ago, Chief Choi Do-hyun. He promised Choi Chang-sik that if he helped him get revenge he would delete the video, and they could pretend none of this ever happened. Of course Choi Chang-sik could never agree to that. He lied to the chief, saying Kim Young-kyu had lost his mind and was talking nonsense, then had him locked up for the time being. But deep down he knew Kim Young-kyu would never let him off the hook. After a long inner struggle he finally decided to confess everything. But just as he was about to turn himself in, he learned that the chief had gone out to a gathering. He immediately realized something was wrong. When he rushed to the interrogation room he found that Kim Young-kyu had already been released by the chief, because there was no evidence proving he was the killer. He immediately drove to the place where the chief was attending the gathering, but he was still too late. The chief was blown up on the spot. Meanwhile, the police station suddenly received an anonymous email through the public system. The video in the email clearly captured the entire process of Choi Chang-sik killing the man. The entire police station erupted in shock. No one could believe it, that the highly respected Detective Choi was actually a murderer. Then word came in that the chief had been killed in the explosion. The deputy chief immediately ordered everyone to arrest Choi Chang-sik. Everyone sprang into action, but Detective Ma stayed behind. He just felt that something wasn't right. Following the clues Choi Chang-sik had provided during their phone call, he quickly uncovered the wrongful conviction from 15 years ago. After investigating the family records of Old Kim's supposed son, he uncovered a shocking secret. Kim Young-kyu wasn't Old Kim's son at all. The seemingly clueless rookie officer, Cha Dong-ja, was actually Old Kim's biological son. Meanwhile, Choi Chang-sik had also found Kim Young-kyu. By then he had already taken a fatal dose of an illegal substance, and clearly did not have much time left. He finally told Choi Chang-sik the truth. Everything he had done was to help Cha Dong-ja carry out his revenge. Now that the chief was dead, and Choi Chang-sik was the only one left but was already in serious trouble, his mission was complete. Now he wanted to take all the blame for the person he loved most, and protect him at the cost of his own life. But what he did not know was that Detective Ma had already learned the truth, and had already tracked down Cha Dong-ja. He tried to convince Cha Dong-ja to turn himself in, but his revenge was not over yet, so how could Cha Dong-ja simply surrender? He caught Detective Ma off guard and attacked him. After a fierce struggle, Cha Dong-ja managed to take his gun. He then kidnapped Choi Chang-sik's son and called Choi Chang-sik, telling him to meet at Hangang Park. Choi Chang-sik went there alone and finally came face to face with Cha Dong-ja. Despite Choi Chang-sik's fury, Cha Dong-ja remained completely calm. Instead, he calmly told him a story. It turned out that he had actually caused the incident 15 years ago when he was just a child. He had accidentally witnessed his father, who worked at the casino, being brutally mistreated. In a fit of anger, he poisoned the water supply, which resulted in the deaths of 12 people. But he never imagined that the police would frame his father and pin the entire crime on him. For years he endured everything quietly, enrolled in the police academy, and came to work alongside Choi Chang-sik, and planned this revenge that had been 15 years in the making. He killed everyone connected to that case. Just then police sirens pierced the rainy night. A large number of officers arrived and surrounded them. Cha Dong-ja then made his final demand. All he wanted was for Choi Chang-sik to surrender and face the law. On one side was the safety of his son, and on the other was the guilt weighing on his conscience. In the end, Choi Chang-sik chose not to pull the trigger. He emptied the magazine and let himself be arrested. His eyes were filled with guilt and relief as he looked at Cha Dong-ja.
제가 그랬어요. 저를 잡아가세요.
진규야, 아저씨는 알아. 너도 아버지도 나쁜 사람이 아니야. 힘내서 꿋꿋하게 살아야 돼. 알았지?
It turned out Cha Dong-ja had killed everyone, but he spared Choi Chang-sik because of the last bit of humanity Choi had shown back then. As he watched Choi Chang-sik being arrested, he thought of his father who had died after being falsely accused, and of Detective Ma whom he had killed with his own hands, and Kim Dong-kyu who had loved him for half his life. Cha Dong-ja raised the gun toward himself, and ended this tragic and twisted revenge with his own life. Only after it was all over did he realize that revenge could never set him free. Instead it had left him covered in blood and turned him into the very person he hated most. The pouring rain washed away the blood on the ground and seemed to wash away the city's sins, but the people who had been hurt and the lives that had been lost could never come back. That brings today's story to an end. I'm Matt and I'll see you next time.